To go in with the idea that I want to be a millionaire as quickly as I can. Wrong attitude. I had nothing. I had no money. If I didn't survive, there was not going to be anybody there that was going to bail me out. I knew nothing about investing. Eventually, I did become a millionaire. So what? Great success leads to great competition. I don't give a damn about the share price. What I care about is the financial strength of the business. I think about all the ways that people blow money. Found out that I could generate about an average of a 7% return on my dividend income out of 20 businesses. Despite what's happened to the share value, the shares do go up. So all of a sudden, you're doubling the value of your portfolio. This is all nice to have in theory, so I go through and putting my money in, and my money keeps going up and up and up. Eventually, you do end up making income more than your salary. I make far more income now than I did when I was a senior vice president. I'm quite happy with my life the way it is, and I don't have to be trying to prove to somebody that I'm rich.
Investors, welcome back to another go-round of Masters of the Market. Now, this week, I'm incredibly excited to have on with me Ian Duncan MacDonald, who is an author of 9 different books, all related to dividend investing, as well as a dividend podcaster. Now, here to share his story with us and all of his wisdom is Ian himself. So, Ian, first and foremost, welcome to Masters of the Market. Thank you for joining us. And I want to go ahead and just pass the first question right over to you, which is, what exactly is your story and how did you get to where you are today?
It's a long story. Are you sure you're ready for this?
We're up for it.
You're up for it. Okay. A lot of it goes back to the very beginning. When I worked my way through university in the mines in a place called Sudbury, Ontario, they employed 22,000 people up there. And it was the largest nickel mine in the world. I could work for 4 months and get enough money to pay for my little apartment and my tuition and my books and all of that. And then I'd go back for another 4 months. So in my last year, they went and strike and I didn't get all my money. So I'm short of money in my last year. I need some money. So I decided to supply teach. My original thought had been, I'm going to be a high school history teacher. Because when you grow up in a mining town, what do you do with a university degree? So I supply taught, and I very quickly learned I did not want to spend my life in a classroom. So now I graduated. I've got $100 left, and I go back and I work in the mine for 4 months. And now I come down to the big city, and all I wanted was a job where I'd wear a shirt and a tie. No more of this hard helmet and dirty clothes and all of that, and noise and smells and all that. And I go to a placement agency and they send me over to a company called Dun & Bradstreet. I'd never heard of them and no idea who they were. At that time, they were the largest commercial credit reporting agency in the world with hundreds of thousands of customers around the world. And I started off as a commercial credit reporter. It was the best education in business I think anybody could possibly have. Every day, I was sent out to write 11 reports on 11 businesses, and I got to walk in and speak to the owners of these businesses. And even though there was a written form, I could ask them any question I wanted. So I went out and every day I'd write these reports and I'd ask these questions. And it was fascinating to me because I had no business background whatsoever. And I honestly thought that I was going to be doing this for the rest of my entire life. However, they had different plans. In about 8 months, I went progress through the company in various levels of reporting. Then I was a supervisor, and I didn't like that. That was a boring job. So then I got into sales, and I was not a natural born salesman. I knocked on 220 doors before I got my first sale, literally door to door, out in these commercial business sections. But I learned how to sell, and I was then able to teach hundreds, possibly thousands of other people how to sell. Very rapidly, I became the top salesman in the marketing service division. They needed a general manager for it, and they plucked me out and they put me into it. And I had doubts because I could have made more money as a salesman. But it was fascinating once again. It was a new division, was starting off. And what I was selling was sales organization tools, advertising, marketing information. And I'm calling on ad agencies. I'm calling on marketing people. I'm calling on salespeople. And they taught me everything I probably knew about sales and marketing. And I go along. Never years go by and they change presidents. A new president comes in. I'm now elevated from managing maybe a sales force of 20 or 30 people up to managing a sales force of 100. I'm in charge of all division sales, all marketing, all sales. And I stayed that way until I was 32. I wanted to be president of the Canadian subsidiary. They said, no, 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 you cannot be president because you have to spend time in the United States because everybody knows there's no intelligence outside of the borders of the USA. And I did not want to go to the USA for personal reasons. And I thought, okay, now is the time to leave. So I waited till I got my year-end bonus and I got a job with a company that I'm not even sure it exists anymore called Drake Office Overload. They were a placement agency. And I was put in charge of developing a company that screened senior executives, and another company was a small collection agency. Out I went developing this company. I spent months studying how to interview people and screen them and what to look for. And out into the world I went and I got this thing going. It was a screwball company. I stayed there a year. They didn't give me a raise. It was time to move on. And along came another company called Creditel. They were in direct competition with Dun & Bradstreet. They were a little bit smaller, but not that much smaller. But they only had on the credit reporting side about maybe 3 or 4% of the market. And they were the largest commercial collection agency in the country. And what was weird is they were member owned, not for profit. So I go over there. I'm now a regional manager with 5 offices, and out I go and I learn the commercial collection business. It was a fascinating business that you could make money from junk, and it was junk, but I found out that we could collect about 60% of the commercial accounts and so on and so on. So I was pretty successful. Then they had a guy who knew nothing about reporting leave, and I said, I want his job. And they put me in as vice president of the reporting division, which was losing $1 million a year. And I was to build this up. This was just at the start of building huge databases. So over the next few years, I built a commercial database of about 2,200,000 businesses. I designed scoring systems and I designed organization systems for managing salespeople. And I built this thing up to the point that it was making close to $10 million in profit. And then I was the youngest of all the vice presidents. I'm generating more than half the revenue in the business, but I'm 10 years younger. They turned 60 and I'm now 50. And what did they want to do? They wanted to retire and get their money out. So they sold it off to Equifax. I got a signing bonus for joining Equifax. Up until then, I was under the impression that I was going to get a index pension fund of 80% of my very generous salary when I retired. However, the company being sold, no index pension fund. And what am I going to do? I'm now in my early 50s. So they gave me a settlement, a reasonably satisfactory settlement. I knew nothing about investing. I take the money, and I had a friend who owned a securities company. And I went to him and I said, Hugh, can you invest this for me? Yes, indeed, I sure can. And he said, we're going to put it all into mutual funds. And all you'll have to do when you retire in another 10, 15 years is sell off 4% of that, and that'll keep you until you're 90. And I said, oh, and it'll be safe. And I said, great, that sounds good. So we wait 3 years, and 3 years later, I've lost $300,000 of what I gave him. And I said, what the hell do I do now? So I thought, this is nuts. And then I thought to myself, if I'm going to sell this off, that means it's going to be shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and going down, and I'm more vulnerable. This was in the year 2000. I had lunch with the owner of the securities company. And at lunch, he's going on and on about some fool he had who had $2 million invested with him that had said, there's going to be a market crash. He's withdrawn the $2 million. How could the guy be such an idiot? Within a month, the market crashed. And once again, my money dropped like a stone. It was terrible. Okay, so I took my money back and I said, I am going to learn how to invest my own money. I'm never going to trust anybody with my money again, and I'm going to learn how to be successful at it. This is when I fell back on my previous experience. I built scoring systems for banks where they would test it. I'd build the scores on businesses, and they'd go through and they'd take historical data and run my scores against it. They came back and said they were amazingly accurate in their predictions about what was going to happen. So I thought, okay, that's interesting. But when Equifax bought Creditel, they brought in all of these PhDs with statistical backgrounds, and they scoffed and laughed at my scoring system. So they went and they spent $500,000 building a scoring system to replace it. Guess what happened? We had 50,000 customers. They didn't want to use it. They wanted to use my scoring system. So it taught me how to sell a scoring system to a market as well. Okay, so I have my money. It's now shrunk down to almost half of what I'd started with. I go through and I said, okay, investing in stocks is no different than any other form of commercial risk. I am investing in the people in the company. I'm not investing in some numerical, airy-fairy sort of stock that's out there. It's people who were like me that controlled the sales, and I controlled the expenses, and I generated a profit. And this is what they are doing as well. The people that are controlling the share price are the speculators. The speculators are optimistic speculators who are sure the price is going to go up. And the pessimistic speculators in the same auction vehicle that they're in are the ones who are saying, this thing is topped out and we're going to get out before we lose money on it. So you've got this constant battle going on between optimists and pessimists. Okay, I don't give a damn about the share price. What I care about is the financial strength of the business. Second thing is that I know I've looked at millions of businesses literally in my lifetime, and I've scored them and done all sorts of things with them. You can never be 100% sure as to what's going to happen. So you do require diversification. Okay, how much diversification? I found out that I could generate about an average of a 7% return on my dividend income out of 20 businesses. And on top of that, you'd usually get, because these are strong businesses, despite what's happening with the share value, the shares do go up, and they usually would average about 12%. Not in a market crash year, but they would go up as well. So all of a sudden, you're doubling the value of your portfolio about every 5 years as you're going along. This is all nice to have in theory. So I go through and I'm putting my money in, and my money keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And then I got involved in an interesting fight between a bunch of developers who wanted to take 10 acres of a club that I belonged to and turn it into 3,000 condos. And I led a group of hundreds of people to stop this. And it caused me to write things and so on. But it brought me in contact with a lot of other people. One of those people was an 80-year-old woman who had owned 5 gift stores, and she'd sold them, and she got her money. And so she was helping me in this project. And she says, I've lost $300,000, just like I did with my advisor. Can you help me? And I thought, okay, I can do and show you what I do, and I will teach you how to invest the way I do. And she said, okay. So I sat down and I must have answered 300 questions from her on the internet. She was pretty logical about it, but I taught her how to invest the way I do. And she had her doubts about that. And for the first year, I'd be getting phone calls. Such and such a stock has dropped. It's now down to such and such. What should I do? Should I sell it? And I'd say, what is the score? And she'd come back. So the score is 60. Okay. What is the dividend? Oh, they're still paying a 6% dividend. Forget about the price. Just go. She had told the investment advisor that all she wanted out of her $1 million portfolio was $36,000 a year. This is like giving him license to Robert. So she was getting back 36,000. She thought that it was coming from him generating dividends and things like that. When I looked at what he was doing, every month he was selling off as much as he could. He was putting through more trades in a month than I would probably do in 10 years. And he was robbing her blind, and it was terrible. So she learned to invest. I still talk to her. She doesn't live that far away. And she sometimes forgets to check on her portfolio because she assumes the money is going to be coming in. And she's right, it does. So in a nutshell, that is my story.
A powerful story, and that there's a lot to learn. I had a lot of questions for you, and I want to actually dive in to one of the first questions. You have a very, what sounds like, tenacious work ethic and not giving up. And I mean, time and time again, that was in your story. So I just want to learn a little bit about where you think that tenacity comes from to not give up. Because even in the world of investing, again, you were losing money. A lot of people would just throw up the white flag and walk away.
Yeah, they do. And where it came from, I don't really know. My father was a miner. He had never invested a thing in his life. I have a brother who was a university professor. I remember him sitting in the smelter with his thing. He was an English professor, and he had a car of very obscure English words that he would be memorizing at lunchtime, this sort of a thing. But he did stick to it. He did end up as a teacher. I think it came from that I had nothing. I had no money. If I didn't survive, there was not going to be anybody there that was going to bail me out. That was for sure. Now, the other thing I suppose that is important is I married. I met my wife my first day of university. And we've now been married for 55 years. And that was 60 years ago that I met her. When I got married and there's a child on the way and all this sort of a thing, all of a sudden, life became very, very serious. I had to make money. I'm living in a small apartment above a butcher store, and things are. I got a Volkswagen with a heater that doesn't work, and this sort of a thing. So I knew I had to make it, but that was to me the final incentive. Up until then, I probably could have given up. But all of a sudden, I became a very, very, very good salesman, making a lot of money, and off I went. But I had to learn, as I said, how to sell, just as like I had to learn everything. I don't know, maybe it was just that experience. I had to do it. There wasn't any other choice.
Survival of the fittest, if you will.
Survival of the fittest.
So let me ask you this: when it comes to dividend investing versus growth investing, and you mentioned that mutual funds were really the first type of investment that you were invested in because of this advisor. Well, why not early on in your investing career go all in on growth stocks, just given that determination to make it? And a lot of people would argue that with growth stocks, you'd get there much faster.
Unfortunately, statistics prove them wrong. 80% of speculators in 10 years will not have made money. They'll have lost money. Not that I knew that at the time, but I did, before I really got into it, I did test some things. Like I even remember shorting a stock that I knew the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. So I just said, I'm going to short this stock. Well, of course, when you're shorting stock, you're gambling. And of course, instead of it going down, it went up. So I got out and I lost money on it. But there were things like that. But the other thing was that when I was designing scoring systems for businesses, what did I look at? I had to convince 4,000 companies to give us their age trial balances every 90 days. I had to set up a system in every courthouse in the country of picking up commercial suits and judgments. I had to go to collection agencies and convince them to feed me their collection information. I had to go to the bankruptcy courts to get them to feed me the information. So I'm looking at this river of information that I've got total complete access to. And I'm seeing the failures. I'm learning very quickly that most businesses that start off this year will not survive 5 years. 80% of them will disappear. So I don't have this feeling that things are going to go up and up and up forever, because I know I've been doing this for 50, 60 years. I see what's happened to businesses. I remember writing a thing for one of my podcasts about Tesla. I think it was 2 years ago. And I said, listen, great success leads to great competition. And I said, you watch, they are going to have competitors come out of the woodwork because they're making too much profit and everybody knows it. And sure enough, they are. Now they're trying to stop the Chinese manufacturers from coming in to the United States, but the Chinese manufacturers that are going to be launching in Europe, it costs them, they're selling their cars in China for $10,000. Even if they put 100% tariff on it, and they sell them for 20,000 in the US, they're still going to eat up the market. And this is the way life is. Nothing is ever staying the same. Every major business is going to disappear at some point. And in one of my podcasts, about 2 podcasts back, I did one on BlackBerry. Remember Obama saying crackberry because it was so addictive? And they were the first ones to come out with the smartphone. And they did. But they were utterly convinced that there was no way that anybody would replace their buttons by pressing something on glass. That was nuts. So they got up to $120 a share. You can now buy the shares for $2.03. It was just boom. As soon as the iPhone came out, that was the end of it. Bill Gates himself said that there's somebody working in a garage of his parents' garage who's developing something that's going to wipe out the iPhone and Microsoft. Maybe he's right. Who knows? But I do believe it because I've seen it. Once you handle hundreds of thousands of collection claims and you go after those businesses, large and small, you become very cynical about where things are going in life. I want to be very, very sure about the strength of the businesses that I invest in. And most of the high-flying growth stocks are not financially strong. I think, what was it? I got one of them. I was surprised it was trading at around $204 a share. Its book value was $4. Is this a strong stock? No, it isn't. I don't give a damn if they are leading and part of the Magnificent Seven on the stock market. I'm not going to invest in it.
What about ETFs?
ETFs, now you're into my favorite subject. Mutual funds are a great way for fund companies to make a lot of money. Someday, look at an ETF or a mutual fund or an index fund and check their prospectus and read what it says. Number one, you are being guaranteed nothing. You have no control over what they're going to do with your money and where they're going to put it and what stocks they're going to put it in. Somebody says, well, what about getting the ones that are paying out dividends? Okay, so then you have an ETF with 300 stocks in it. They're all paying dividends, but the dividends, 90% of them are probably under 1%. There's a couple of high-flying ones in there that are indication. But when you blend 200 businesses together, what's going to be your return? Your return is going to be around 1%. If you took 20 stocks and you invested it in stocks that are paying over 5%, you're going to get a 7% return. Why would you do it? It doesn't make any sense. On top of that, they can do all sorts of things. If they want to sell off a stock that they've got an investment in and take a capital gain, you're the one that's going to be paying the money on the capital gain, not the fund company. They're just there to make money. I did a study in one of my other podcasts of the S&P 500. I think there was one company out of the 500 that I might invest money in. 200 of them didn't pay dividends. The others were paying dividends under 2% and so on. But there just are not that many companies out there that are financially strong that pay good dividends. So to put your money into an ETF, you're going to get a blending. It's going to give you maybe a 1% back. And it's going to be safe. They're going to say because it's spread, but you can be just as safe with 20 carefully chosen stocks.
Let's talk a little bit about carefully choosing these stocks, because you have a lot of people out there who want to jump into the market. They don't really know where to start. Do you have a simple process that you could share with us that can help us eliminate some of the rotten rocks, I'll say, and really stick to the gold?
Yes, it's called the scoring system. And in my books, I spent a whole chapter explaining how the scoring system works. It measures 11 things that is common information that you can pick up on the internet free of charge. Okay. It just takes a bit of time. But when I design my books, you know, I have the scores already worked out in the for each stock. And I've then got the historical record of the stock as well, where I want to measure share price and I want to measure the dividend payout going back to 1999 so that I can look at three stock market crashes. What happened before the crash? What happened after the crash? How long did it take the stock to recover? Did they even notice the crash in their dividend payouts? A surprising number of companies who may have lost 20, 30% of their share value did not change their dividend payouts at all. It's got nothing to do with their profits. It's just the speculators playing their games. So you go through, you're measuring things like, on each one, measure the price of the stock. What was the price 4 years ago? What's the book value? What's the operating margin? What's the price to earnings? How many analysts are rating it a buy? How many analysts are rating it a strong buy? And so on and so on and so on. So you do the score, you end up with a score of 100. The highest score I've ever hit was a 78. The lowest I've ever seen was an 8. I don't touch things under a score of 50. Out of the ones over 50, I'm able to build my portfolio. Now, people say, well, what ones do you have in your portfolio? I don't tell people. I said, no, it's you have got to understand why you were choosing that stock, and you have got to score it so you understand what you're buying. It does no good to copy me, because if you understand what you are buying, you will hold on to that stock when the going gets tough, and you'll look at things like, well, what is the score? What is the dividend yield on it? That's more or less what it is. So everybody that buys my books, there's a couple of times in the book where I say, if you want the scoring system, send me an email and I'll send you the scoring system. And I've had hundreds of people ask for the scoring system. I've had people tell me it has helped them, choose the stocks that they want. And that pleases me. I don't write the books to make money. I write the books because I'm curious. I have a mind where I want to understand, what makes that stock the way it is. Why is the New York Stock Exchange different than the Toronto Stock Exchange? Why don't the major Magnificent Seven run up at the very top of stocks that I'd like to have? So I do all of this research and I write all of these books so that I can end up with that data because I couldn't buy it anywhere else. It wasn't available. So for the matter of the nominal amount of money I have to pay for my book, I get my printed book, and anybody else who wants to buy can buy it. But I've got what I wanted out of it.
Sure.
And all the money, I don't make that much money out of it, but I've never spent it. It, what I don't need the money.
I love what you said in that a lot of people will oftentimes hear someone else talk about a stock or even ask you what you have in your portfolio so then they can go ahead and invest in it too, which is certainly not the investor mindset, if you will. This is someone who just wants to throw money around and hope that that investment actually turns into the green. How would you put together a perfect portfolio, if you will? Because you also shared a couple of times about 20 stocks. And I've had a few investors on here who talked about almost overloading the portfolio with almost 100 plus stocks in there. And then on the other end, only 10 to 12 stocks in their portfolio. I'm curious how you derived at the number 20 for 20 holdings in a portfolio.
Okay, it's investing equally in 20. That means I've got 5% of my wealth invested in 20 stocks, in each stock 5%. The thinking was if I am clearing a 7% gain on my portfolio, even if the worst thing ever happened, that one of these stocks, crumbled and disappeared, I've lost 5%, but I'm still ahead because I've got 2% gain over that. And the thing is, I also know from my experience of working on businesses that financially strong businesses do not disappear overnight. They do disappear in time, but it's more like losing, having losing a small hole in your tire and losing it. It isn't like a tire bursting all of a
Sure.
sudden. This just doesn't happen, at least not normally. There are a few exceptions. Enron was one exception.
Dividend yields and yield chasers. How do we avoid yield chasing and know when a good yield is there to stay and when we should
Not
avoid?
only that, what is a good yield? As I said, I want stocks over 5%, but I don't want to have stocks paying over 10% because I know once again from my experience and all the hours and hours that I spent studying this, that once you start getting a dividend yield up around 12%, 13%, or even in this book here, there's someone here paying 32%. That these are one-shot wonders. Usually they've done it for maybe once that they've got that kind of return or whatever. I'm not interested in those. I'm looking for stability for the most part, but I want to see that the dividend payment is constantly increasing, just a little every year. The strange thing is dividend yields go up faster than share prices, oddly enough. You can see a share price will go up maybe 10%, a dividend yield will go up 30% or 40%. It's very strange when you look at it. Now, when you talk about, I did one thing on one of the books I did, I identified that the 20 top scoring stocks traded on the New York Stock Exchange with the highest dividends. And they're high scorers, good dividends. And I said, wonder what will happen to those stocks over the next couple of years. What if I just built a portfolio just mathematically and just these 20 best scoring stocks? What would happen? Well, it was interesting. This was, I think, before we went through the crash that we're currently still in the middle of, in my opinion, that the stocks fared relatively well. Not all of them, but for the most part, all 20 are still in existence. They're still paying out their dividends. Their share prices may have dropped down and so on, but it seemed to have worked. To me, that was a little bit too simplistic a way of building a portfolio. I wanted to, put more thought into it than that, but it did work. And I'm still getting, there's a website called
Simply safe
Simply
dividends.
Wall Street.
No.
And
Okay.
I put it in there, and they keep sending reports on what's going on with those stocks. And it's interesting to look at.
Let's talk about some of the mistakes that investors are making. And I want to know what's the most common mistake that you see investors making? And we'll go on both ends, younger investors and older investors.
I think the biggest mistake all investors make for the most part is that they're chasing a dream of becoming rich overnight. It doesn't happen that way in life. It sure never happened that way with me, that's for sure. And they they get it's so nice to sit there and listen to the media and the analysts who are in there to make as much money out of you as they possibly can. And they're sitting back and they're feeding all this to you, and it sounds so wonderful. And then they never bother looking at the operating margins. They don't look at anything. The financial information is sitting there, it's free, and they don't look at it. They will just take what they hear you know, on the thing. Yes, if NVIDIA is going up X amount of dollars, geez, I got to get in there right away and so on, because I'm going to be rich, rich, rich. Except I think of BlackBerry, who hits 120 and disappears almost overnight. You know, I guess I'm a bad one to talk about. I don't think investment analysts would like talking to me very much. I find it strange that all the books I've written and all the people I've talked to, I've never yet had an investment analyst come back and start arguing with me or telling me that I'm wrong. Why is that? I think most of them don't have an idea as to what a strong company is to begin with and couldn't describe it. That's a horrible thing to say. But most of them make their money selling funds and they're salesmen. And, so busy because, I know from my sales experience that if I've got 200 clients, which would be typically of the typical investment advisor, I'm going to be losing 20% of them every year. It's just the way it is in sales. So he's got to recover those 40. I know mathematically, he's got to be trying to chase 400 possible prospects to replace what he's lost. They don't have time to hold anybody's hand. They don't have time to do any analysis of stocks. They just don't have the time. They are salesmen selling what they can sell and make money. And that's okay. I was a salesman too.
So with that said, how do we know who to trust or where do we turn to? Because there's a lot of voices out there like you're sharing, whether it's the analyst, I mean, heck, even on YouTube, as I'm sure you know, or podcasting. How do we know who to trust? I almost feel like there is no one to trust, and it's really all on each individual investor.
You were absolutely right. There is no one to trust. The only thing you can trust are the mathematical accounting records they have to submit to the various exchanges, that they've got to put that information there. But even then, I know from having worked in the and designed scoring systems in the past that you talk to an auditor who is working for a large company where he's getting maybe $1 million for doing the audit every year. And is he going to try to make that company look as good as he possibly can? I think so.
Of course.
I just think so. So, there's that aspect that you have to do it. But for the most part, what I trust is history of the stock, history of the people who are responsible for making the profits. That is what you trust.
There's the good old adage that's out there that's to say no one should be timing the market. It's best to have time in the market. But for those who really want to first try to understand the market in of itself, in that case, would it be good just to jump in and trial and error? Or would you recommend really sitting down to study, stocks and businesses first before even putting money into the market?
My study came with my jobs. I wasn't aware that I was learning. So it became easy. If I was a miner working for International Nickel Company and I wanted to get into the stock market, I should learn and understand businesses and so on. Which brings me back to another story. I'm in the smelter, stinky, hot, disgusting place. It was a tremendously huge building, about a mile long and maybe 40 stories high, sort of a thing. There was a guy in there who used to work all the overtime he could get to invest his money in overseas. What was it? It was a guy by the name of Bernie Kornfeld had one of the first mutual funds. investors overseas. And he put all his money into it. And then I remember feeling so sorry when the company disappeared and went bankrupt. This guy worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. That's horrible. That's another thought why I don't want to go into mutual funds. I want to know exactly what I'm invested in and why I invested in it. And I want people who study what I do and follow my advice to do exactly the same. I want them to understand what they are getting into. It isn't easy and it isn't black and white. Now, once you're set up, I can go for a couple of years. I haven't made a trade in, I think, 2 years now. I haven't known reason to. I chose my stock. The last trade I made, I had a stock that I bought for $4. It was paying 8%. It went up to $20, $24. It never changed the dividend yield, or not the yield, but the dividend payout. So I now got a 24 stock paying 1%. What did I do? I sold it because that's nuts. I can take that money, invest it, and make more money elsewhere. But that's the only reason I sold it. Now, I didn't sell anybody because, geez, the share price has gone down or whatever. As you know, it's back to the score and it's back to the dividend yield.
Let's take someone who recently emailed me, around 55 years old, in a panic that he doesn't have anything invested yet and looking to start, and asking if it's too late for him.
Of course, it's not too late. If that's assuming he's got the cash to invest, right?
Sure.
Like the cash I got came from my years of toil where I was rewarded at the end. But go back to the 80-year-old woman I talked about who owned the gift stores. Yeah, she was 80. She still was able to pick up what I was able to do. She understood it. She uses the software. She picked every single stock in her portfolio. I didn't pick them. And she took her income from $36,000 with the investment advisor up to $72,000. She was worried about running out of her money. And at 80 years old, she's now about 85. She had good reason to. The way, from what I could see, the guy was right. It was stupid more than robbing her blind. I just couldn't believe that they would do something like that. It just didn't make sense. So I'd say, no, you can always build a strong portfolio. And I guess that brings up the other thing, to go in with the idea that I want to be a millionaire as quickly as I can. Wrong attitude. What you should have is, I want to be financially independent, making as much money from my investments as I am now making as an employee. That is the attitude. That then teaches you the discipline to sit there and very patiently invest your salary. And then as your dividend income comes in, you invest that, and they all start rising. It's bigger and bigger and bigger. And you just gradually build it up and go from there. And eventually you do end up making income more than your salary. I make far more income now than I did when I was a senior vice president. But I make more money now than I did then, and I pay a fraction of the taxes. Now, eventually I did become a millionaire. So what? It's just a number. It doesn't really mean anything. The thing was, I had achieved my goal of financial independence. That is what I wanted, because then I had the time to write my books. I had my time to do my painting and my photography, my digital art, and all of the things that I couldn't have the time to do when I was very busily working for somebody else. But now I could do whatever I wanted. I could go away for 2-3 months in the winter, and I spend as much in 2 or 3 months as most people will spend in 2 weeks. It's going somewhere. It's the freedom, and it can be there if you plan for it.
I'm sure you're well aware of the FIRE movement, financial independence, retire early, for anyone who hasn't heard about it. What is your take on FIRE? And basically, I mean, from a lot of the stories that I've heard, and FIRE initially sparked me into getting invested into a lot of dividend stocks, but I feel like a lot of individuals who are focused on FIRE almost cut out aspects or elements of their life to try to get rich. I always like to say get rich by Tuesday.
Can you fast track the freedom? Um, I think what you're also saying is another thing. I always have a chapter in my book on frugal living. I think about all the ways that people blow money, and you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want to be financially independent, you've got a goal in mind. And I own 3 cars. One car is 21 years old that my wife drives, which I bought new for her. I think it's got 98,000 kilometers on it, which is just about nothing. I bought my car in 2010, which is a Subaru, and I bought it new, and it's got about 98,000 kilometers on it. And I got another car that my daughter drives, and it's probably got even less than that on it, and it's even older. But the cars are all in top condition. There's no rush. They're well maintained, and they get me from A to B. Now, I could hypothetically go out and buy a Bentley or a Rolls Royce or something like that. But why? I don't care what people think or who they are or what they think of me. You know, I'm quite happy with my life the way it is. And I don't have to be trying to prove to somebody that I'm rich. There's a very famous book called The Millionaire Next Door by
Yep.
2 professors down in the US. If you've read it, the big thing he did there is they went to all the high end areas in the United States where all the mansions were to interview the people. And what did they find? The people that appear to be rich were the ones where they weren't rich. They just we were greatly in debt. I don't have any debt. I actually do have one debt. I bought a condo and I got 2.5% mortgage on it. And I thought, should I pay this thing off? I said, no, that's nuts. I'm making 7%. Why would I lose the extra income? But it'll come up for renewal next year. And if it comes up, maybe I'll just pay it off, depending on what the mortgage rate is. But other than that, that's it. Pay off your credit cards. Who wants to be paying 22%, 23%, 24% on credit card debt? That is insane. I always remember a dermatologist saying, "Oh, gotta watch it. I'm over on my credit cards, and he's paying 24%. Why? He's making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. It's crazy."
Ian, I'm curious to get your take on how you think we even got here in the first place with this, leveling up with the Joneses mentality and needing to spend versus living a frugal, more simple life. I mean, I even find that people who live a more frugal, simpler life are genuinely happier versus those who are out there chasing the wealth and the look and the feel of being wealthy. But as you just shared, right, from the millionaire next door, typically they're broke.
I'm far from broke. I have I probably have more cash as my reserve fund than I probably would have had to work 3 or 4 years for normally. So, and I do have those portfolios. I do live in a house that is probably worth a couple of $1 million, which I bought for 128,000 48 years ago, right? But time and money and so on, right?
Sure.
I'm still living here. I'm not. Why the house has 5 bedrooms? There's only my wife and myself. Why would I want a bigger house? It was fine when I had 3 kids at home and a mother-in-law, but that's all gone. So
Is there a
if I'm
way
not,
we can almost like reprogram our brains to be a little bit more frugal these days?
I think it isn't frugal. It's a question maybe of security or whatever. Maybe it's who you marry is very important. Um, like I know my wife's parents, they were fairly well off. They both owned businesses and so on. But I remember my mother-in-law driving this beat up old Morris Minor that, I couldn't believe it. This is in Bermuda. My wife's a Bermudian. And then they had another friend who owned 50 houses in Bermuda. Bermuda, a house back then was $1 million minimum. So they're worth a lot of money. This guy owned 50 houses. One day I'm out driving the car and we hit a curb or something and blow a tire. he comes over and drives me to a tire store, and he says to me, okay, now you stay in the car, because if they see you, they'll think you're a rich guy. This is an island, 65,000 people. You think they don't know who he is, but he goes in and negotiates it. But he had holes in the floor of the car. That's how much it meant to him. He lived in the same house he never lived in. It's just, it is a mindset. And I think maybe it's a North American mindset as well.
Sure. What would you recommend, at least in terms of personal finance, where to get started before getting invested into the stock market? Because it's, I think, very enticing for a lot of people just to say, okay, I need to get invested. I know I need to do that. But a lot of times we skip crucial steps. What steps would you take or would you recommend taking before we actually open up brokerage accounts and start to toss money in?
I think you got to go even further back than that. It comes back to how am I going to make money in life? It came as a big eye opener to me when I got my first commission check. And all of a sudden, it was what, maybe half of what the hell I'd been making in a year, sort of a thing. That if you can get a piece of the business, whatever that business is, whether you're a commission salesman or you're the owner of the business or whatever, that you can get ahead and you can make money by selling things to other people. Selling isn't easy, it requires a lot of work, but it beats being what? Working for a salary. If you have the ability to talk and explain things and you're reasonably intelligent, and it's got nothing to do with education, you can make more money than you possibly thought. Now, if you've never had the exposure to that life, you don't know it's possible. But if you have had the exposure to that life, you do know it's possible.
How do we limit limiting beliefs?
How do we limit limiting beliefs?
Yeah.
Limiting beliefs. Usually the ones that are talking about it don't have it. It's the ones that don't have it that I would trust. I mean, the ones that don't say anything about it. I
Sure.
know all kinds of people out there with all kinds of money. Is anybody even aware of it? No, not at all. They don't. Yet it's the ones that have to show it and brag about it and say this. Those are the ones that are suspects. The guys that have it, they don't care. They've been there. They've seen it.
Ian, what's the best sales tip that you've ever received?
There was a guy by the name of Ralph Bernizer who was the vice president of sales. I remember him saying to me, Ian, you don't sell much. This is when I was starting off, but you make a lot of calls. And he was right. It required a lot of work, but once you do learn how to sell and you are effective, you've already ingrained yourself and you've trained yourself to put out that extra work. I used to work day and night. I'd come home at night and I'd be typing up letters to go out to prospects the next day and then following up on it and on the phone and back and forth. It's constant contact and just doing it. And I used to find it interesting that I'd have a new sales rep who wasn't doing very well. And I would say, okay, I tell you what, you haven't made a sale, but I want you to go out and see all these people and come back and we'll see what happens. She was selling the collection services. Just because she showed up, all of a sudden, we started getting collections from these companies. In other words, you've got to be seen, you've got to be noticed, and they've got to trust you. So I guess she really didn't know anything, but it didn't matter. She was showing up. That was the important thing. That would surprise me in a way.
Sure.
And then you had the razzle dazzle guys who could go out and, sell, let's say, refrigerators to Eskimos, sort of a thing. You'd have that sort of, yeah, there were some like that.
Let's talk a little bit about macros and whether or not macros even matter for investors. So, for example, right now, a lot of market participants are awaiting, the Federal Reserve to cut rates. We're all anticipating when inflation will come back down to that Federal Reserve goal of 2%. Does all of this talk even matter?
No, it once again, as I said before, what matters are the people who are running the company, their track record, how successful they have been. That is what you're paying for when you're buying shares in the company. You're paying for the people that create the profits. That's what's there. And they show and they're willing to share their profits by paying out dividends. And they
Sure.
get into the habit of doing it, which the last thing any company wants to do is to cut their dividend because they know that'll be perceived as that they're in financial difficulty. They're looking at the same thing as well. Like I think back to when I had responsibilities or bottom line responsibilities. Was I worrying about the share price of Equifax? No, I wasn't worrying about the share price of Equifax. I was worried about getting my revenue figures and controlling my expenses. That's what I was worried, even though I had stock options and it were nice to get the extra little bit of money on the stock option. But that was just, it was there, but it wasn't what was motivating me. And it worries me that people have buybacks in their companies. Apple is noted for that they'll spend billions of dollars in buybacks. They're manipulating the stock market. They're keeping their price up. Why? Because the executives in the company are taking your money that could have gone into dividends and they're using it to buy stock in the company because they want to get their stock options. It's sad, but that is the way life is.
It's our reality. I'd love to
It's a
know
reality.
from I'd love to know from your standpoint when it comes to investing in a company and as you've mentioned a few times now, getting to know the insiders, the team, like the teams, the management teams. Is there a way for us to gauge how effective they are?
Of course there is. Look at the results going back for 25 years. Is that share price going up? Is that dividend payout going up? If it is, it's got to be coming from somewhere. It's coming from profits. These are guys that know how to make a profit, and that's what you're paying for. And that's what you ought to look for.
I got one last question for you, Ian. It is my favorite question to ask all investors. I know you don't normally give out what stocks you're invested into, but if I were to give you $10,000 right now to invest in any individual stock, I'm curious to know which stock it would be and why.
Oddly enough, in this book, if I go to the sort by score, right? Number one in the New York Stock Exchange's 106 best high dividend stock is a Canadian company called Canadian Natural Resources. At the time I wrote the book, it was trading at $53. It had a score of 73. I don't own it, but I've often thought I should own it, and I like it because once again, it's got a good track record when I take a look at it, going back on it, and so on. I think that would be one that if I had foolish money to blow, I would blow it on that one.
Investors, there you have it. Ian Duncan MacDonald on with us and Masters of the Market. It has been a real privilege and pleasure to have you on with us, Ian. As I said, a lot of wisdom. Now, investors, you could certainly find Ian's books there. I'm going to put the link in the pinned comment, as well as hopefully the podcast, where you can find more of Ian's wisdom being shared with all of us dividend investors. Now, until next time, we will see you all in the next one.